Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this session of discussion of everything design. Tonight we're going to be focusing on the use of marker and some different illustration techniques. And primarily what I'll be doing tonight is presenting to you live via webcam. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go over some different methods and some techniques, and I'm going to have to just focus on a few items, primarily because it does take a little bit of time to render with marker, but I think you'll find with some of these techniques that I'm going to show you that it can be done fairly easily, and once you get the hang of it, I think you're going to enjoy it as a form of presentation technique. So I see some familiar faces here tonight, and we have quite a few on the call, so I will keep everybody muted. After I get through with some of the techniques, we'll open the floor for discussion, and let's go ahead and get started with this presentation. So again, welcome. My name's Dr. Chris Priest, and I do teach a lot of courses here at the Art Institutes. One of the things that we're going to be discussing tonight really is the use of marker. And let's go ahead and get into this presentation. This is my punch list for some topics for this evening. We're going to start with a little bit of value study, and if you don't know what that is, you will shortly. We'll be doing some color mixing as well. We'll be looking at some different technique, and then we'll do some just some general tips on marker illustrations. And that'll kind of come as we're going through the whole presentation as well. So let's go ahead and see if we can view my video camera here. All right, let me get a little more light on the topic. Okay, so what we have here is the start of a rendering that I've been working on, and where I was showing some techniques. And I do have a YouTube site, and you can of course go and visit that YouTube site when you get a chance. And I'll give you that address as we go forward here. Let's see. It's about all the room I have. So this is a marker and pencil illustration. In this illustration, you can see that there's some shading techniques, there's some lighting techniques, some highlights, some folds, some texture. You know, we get the indication that there's a variety of different shadows being cast, and we can see from this room, you know, there's a number of fixtures on the ceiling and so forth. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're actually going to work on this a little bit, and also on a floor plan. Now here is the pen and ink drawing of the space. How I like to work, I like to create a nice solid pen and ink drawing, and let me see if I could zoom in just a little bit there. Alright, I like to use a lot of different line types and line styles and broken lines and partial lines and multiple lines as I'm doing a pen and ink. And then once I've completed the pen and ink, I like to run a copy, a nice fresh copy here of our illustration. I'm going to run this just right on top. Actually, I'm going to put another sheet of paper underneath this. Hold on. So, lesson number one when you work with marker. Marker bleeds. Marker bleeds through paper very frequently, and it can certainly mess up a table. It can mess up whatever you have underneath it. So do make sure you work with some sort of board. I'm actually working with a piece of old mat board that I've cut. I use it for a few different things, but right now it's got some, well, it has a marker rendering tape to it. But marker does bleed, so make sure that you watch that. Now let's see. let's start with the value study. One of the best things to do as you're starting to render with marker, one of the best things to do as you're starting to render with marker is to really look around you. Look at existing pieces of furniture. Look at photographs of pieces of furniture. You know, don't be afraid to trace or copy something. And what I want to do first on this illustration, I'm going to pull out a piece of trace paper. So I just have a roll of trace that I keep handy. Keep it in a little drawer down here beside me. So I'm going to take this roll of trace and straight edge. There it is. So roll of trace at a straight edge. I'm just going to rip the trace. Again, this is trace paper. It's made for doing some preliminary work, so I never worry about trying to cut it perfectly. Just kind of rip it. Now with this trace paper, what I want to do is this. I want to get an idea of where light may be falling, and I do this with everything. Even if I'm just working on adding pen and ink to this, I like to know where my light sources are. So I don't have them drawn in on this particular one, so let me draw them in real quick. Let's see, let's say that there's light sources pretty much above these pieces of art. Maybe there's a light source over in here, just doing some recess incandescent lighting. Probably be another one somewhere over this way. Follow along here. Don't really want it in my window necessarily. So maybe there's some more in the ceiling, and I'll just kind of imagine where those are. So now I've got a rough idea, and I could either take just a regular pen. I like using marker. Let me just kind of briefly show you. These are some of my markers. I have quite a few collected over the years. Let me get this back in place. All right. So what I like to do is this. Imagine a light source, right? And then think about where light hits. Now, I want to show you something that a lot of people do. I'm just going to do it on this little scrap piece of paper. A lot of students I see will have a light source, and then they'll do this shower of light. And again, what I ask people to do is draw what they see, not what they think they see. The only time you're going to see a shower of light like this is if you're in some sort of smoke-filled light show, maybe in some sort of smoky bar or something. You might see light coming through clouds, but you're never going to see it in an interior space. What you're going to see is you're going to see where light falls. So I could do some graphics here to kind of indicate where the light's going, and then I'm going to see some light up here, right? I'm going to see some light up here because there's a light source right there, right? Since there's a light source here and here, a little bit of graphic, I could probably see a little light here, maybe a little light on the sides. Okay. Now along the wall, there's a light source up here, right? So from this light source, I will probably see a little bit of light hitting in here. Okay, and then I'll definitely see some light hitting on this table. Again, from this light source, I will probably see a little light hitting here, hitting the top here, maybe hitting this arm, hitting the seat front, probably along this part of the ottoman. Okay, so you get the general idea. I like to show where light's hitting because that just kind of helps me as I start to render, gives me an idea of what to shade and what not to shade. So we've got this light here again. We're probably going to see light somewhere down this way, coming down the walls, and then as light hits, it sort of fades, which is really good because it helps us punch out some shapes. Okay, so very basic, just do a very basic, just call this a lighting study. Now from the lighting study, what I can do is I'm going to put this over to the side, and we'll just I'll just keep looking at that as I go. Now, as I go to illustrate, what I want to do is start adding some values. All right, I'm going to be using a series of cool grays. I'm going to start with a cool gray 50. Now, one of the things I see with a lot of students is they have a tendency to try to work like 50 or less. And I'm going to show you, this is just on regular bond paper. Just going to add some strokes in here. This is a 50. I'm not overly concerned. I'm going to be using marker and pencil, so if I go over the line a little bit, I'm not going to be too concerned about it. Want to give a little bit of value to the side over here. I know there'll be a light on top, right? A little bit of light in this area. Let's see, light on top here, but the front will have some shading. The arm will have some shading. And again, I've been doing this for a long time. I'd recommend that you look at a photograph of a piece of furniture and just start with a chair. And from that chair, start shading what you see. Now remember, very important, shade what you see, not what you think you see. When I'm teaching classes like an illustration course, I will often show students a white toilet. And the reason I will show them a white toilet is because if you go and you look at a white porcelain toilet, you will see that it is not pure white. And a lot of times, even if this was a white piece of furniture, a lot of times people would just want to leave it white because, well, it's white. But if you look at something white, like say even a bed sheet, and you look at the folds in a bed sheet, or a wedding dress, or any white piece of furniture, it has a very dark range from, like, say, probably a 70% gray to bright white. And the bright white is only going to be on major highlight areas. It's not going to be throughout the entire piece. Okay? So, all right, so what I'm doing is, you can see here, I've just done some single strokes in areas, and as this dries, as marker dries, marker becomes lighter. All right? If you go over marker while it's wet, you get a little bit of a blended quality. If you wait until the marker's completely dry and you go over, you get a little more of that stroke of the marker, because what happens is the paper becomes saturated and it doesn't absorb into the paper as much as floating on top of the surface. So first stroke absorbs really nicely into the paper. Another stroke while it's damp will absorb, and it'll kind of double up the value a little bit. It'll darken the value a little bit. Now if you wait until the paper's dry, like over here on these sides, again it floats on the surface a little, so you get a little more of that line. A lot of people don't like that line. Here's what I tell you can do. Just got a plastic plate here, and I use this plate a lot for mixing color. I'm going to take my 50% gray, and I'm going to put some of the pigment on this little plastic piece. Now I'm going to take a cool gray, let me find a 10%. A lot of 20s here. Okay, 10% cool gray. I'm going to take a 10% cool gray. I'm going to pick up some of this darker gray, and you can use a clear blender. You can use a light cool gray. And what I'm going to do is kind of take that over the top here, and that'll help blend some of this color about. Okay, so if you really don't like the sharp lines left by marker, you can certainly try to blend them out a little bit. You just get the paper wet, and then you could add a little more pigment and blend it out. And look at this, we're almost getting a watercolor effect, which is kind of a neat effect. All right. So again, this tip is just done with, you could do this with any color, and actually I'll show you that in a second here. But you could do this with grays as well. While I've got the 10% out, got a little, get some of that other color off of it. So you hear me scribbling in the background. Just going to go in and see, it's still got a little pigment on it. That's all right. This is going to be red anyway. All right, so there's our start. Now, here's the part that usually scares students if you're sitting in a classroom and they've been working with a 50% gray, and they think, oh, this is nice and dark and beautiful. and then you come in and you've got 80% gray. So what I want to do here is in these underlying areas, you know, think about this. This is a piece of furniture. It's actually going to be kind of a reddish color when we're done with it. I want to go in, I want to give a little darker value. So I'm just going to go into some of these creases and folds, give a little bit darker value. Where the paper's wet, the color is going to blend a little bit. Let me go in here, just going to get a little darker line. Okay, so you could play with lighter colors if you'd like, but of course it's always fun to play with the darker values. Now I'm going to go back in, since this is still wet, with my 50 and just kind of touch some of those colors and spread them out just a little bit more. All right. Now over here on the side, I definitely want this to be a little darker, so I'm going to come in, scrub in a little more color. All right, so as you can see, we just kind of, we're giving this some body, we're giving it some life, we're lights hitting, we're kind of seeing where there's some shading and some shadowing happening, and then from there we can work in adding pigment. You could do a couple of things at this point. One, let it dry. You can go over this with another color marker and just pretty much just add color right on top of it to give it a certain color. You can go into this with color pencil, and so we'll do a little bit of both of those as time permits here. Just going to add a little bit of value down here on the legs as well. Okay, so now we also, as we're working on this, we don't only have time to do a few pieces here, so let me do this Ottoman as well. Now remember, with the Ottoman we have a light hitting around the edge here, so what I want to do is I'm going to call, because this is the darker of these two sides, because that's what I've chosen to do, I'm going to make this the darker. So I'm going to come in, add some marker, and don't be afraid just to scrub it in a little bit. Okay, leave a little white space. Okay, so we're going to make that the darker of the two sides, and I'm going to go down with a little bit lighter color this time on this side. This is a 30% gray. Now, as you saw as I was working in this area, if you put down a marker stroke in one color or value, and then you go over that stroke again, it will increase the value about 50% up to the next value. So, for example, we started with a 30. This extra stroke I'm doing probably brings it up to about 35% gray. Same thing over here with the 50. We started with the 50 on this side, right? But when I come in and I do this, since it's dry, it probably brings it up more to a 60. If I did it while it was damp, it'd probably be more like 55. Okay, and again, marker gets lighter. You can see this has been lightening. Marker gets lighter as it dries. Now I'm going to go in here with a little bit of the 50 in some of these darker areas, and then add a little bit of value around the leg. So what I'm doing with the leg is just basically darkening one side and then adding a shadow line on the other side. So really get those a little darker, then add that shadow line. Okay? So those little shadow lines really help make something look three-dimensional. Now on the top part of this Ottoman, I'm going to come back in. This is my 30 again. I want to leave white space where the light's hitting. Okay, so just that little ridge of light. And while it's wet, I'm working with a 30 and then back with a 50. Coming around this edge with a 50. Okay, and we just get a little bit of visual movement. That's all it takes. I mean, really, that's all you have to do to get a little bit of visual movement, is just make sure, just like rendering a cube, you've got a light, a medium, and a dark, right? So it's real easy to think in those terms. Think of everything you do as like a little bit of a cube, light, medium, dark. Same thing on these walls. We can make these dark, we can make this more of a medium, we can make in here lighter, saying maybe there's some outside light coming in. Okay, so now we have a base on the, Let me get my controls out of the way here. Now we have a base on our marker rendering to move on with adding a little bit of color. And we're going to add color in a couple of different ways. I want to show you a little bit about how to mix color. A couple ways you can do it. We're going to pull out, I'm just going to pick a few colors here. This is a dark brown, a dark umber. And see, I have a few colors to choose from. You may not have as many colors. I am looking for my red. There it is, Tuscan red. All right. And I'm going to pull out something crimson red, which is a little brighter color red. All right, now here's what we're going to do first. Let's start with this Tuscan red and see how this works. And we're just kind of hoping that this works the way it usually works for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take this Tuscan red and I'm going to give some marker strokes. Now, you know what? If you're really, I want to say maybe tight-fisted, or if you're really methodical, you know, you might use marker strokes like just in one direction. The reason I move around a lot is because sometimes with a marker stroke, if you only did one direction, sometimes it looks like a stripe. Okay, so by moving around a little bit, the eye visually will move about the illustration a little bit, and that makes the mind see this as more of a believable item. And again, whenever I'm talking about illustrating, we're usually talking about believability, not realism. I am not one of those people that has the patience to do like a fine oil painting with a lot of realism, but I certainly can do something such as a marker illustration that can be believable, and people can believe that this is something that's going to happen in a space. All right. Now what I've done is I've added a little bit of our Tuscan red. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my clear plate here, and this could be anything, an old glass plate, an old whatever, old saucer that you don't have a matching cup for. It could be anything. All right, that's my Tuscan red. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clear blender. So this is called a clear blender. Now don't get confused. The clear blender won't really blend much once your marker's on the paper. Okay, it might pick up a little bit of pigment, but it's not going to really blend much. Here's how you use it. You could even use like saran wrap or tinfoil or something. I'm going to pick up a little bit of my color. Now I'm going to take my clear blender and I'm going to come in. The first couple of strokes will be very, very similar to the first Tuscan red. And then after that, what it does is it blends out a little bit. So it blends the color out. So I'm going to do this again. I'm just going to do like the top of the arm. So I want that to be a little lighter. I want a little bit of color in there, but I don't want it to be as dark as the marker was showing up. So I'm going to put a little bit in here. And then I'm going to take a scrap piece of paper off to the side. Clear off my colorless blender a little bit, and then come in and hit some of these lighter areas. So I want a little bit of pigment, but I don't want a lot of pigment. All right, so back to here. This is the way you can get different values of a color. And again, I'll just kind of, the opening strokes are pretty much the same as the original Tuscan red, and then the following strokes fade. So you can go from a dark value to a lighter value very easily by just letting the pigment fade off of the colorless blender. If you don't have a colorless blender, I recommend a 10% gray. And again, we'll just do the same thing for the seat cushion, for the top of the cushion. I want to get the color in here. And then I want a little darker color in the back, but I want it faded in the front. I want kind of a faded color on the top part here, and then darker underneath. So actually, while that's damp, I'm going to take my Tuscan Red again and just kind of go in and add a little bit of color. Now, here's the fun part about working with marker and pencil. If I get too dark, I can always go back with pencil and lighten things up a little bit. All right, so I'm just adding some darker values in some areas. All right, so now let's say you are working on this and all of a sudden you run out of Tuscan Red. What do? Well, this is where you have to be creative. You have to call upon your color theory experience, your color theory courses, and what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take a couple different colors here and see if I can mix Tuscan Red. I've got Crimson Red, which is just a really bright red, and I'm going to I'll put a streak on the paper here. You can see it's a very bright red, so it's very different than the Tuscan. I have Burnt Umber, which is a very, very dark brown, and oh my goodness, my Burnt Umber is running low. Okay, put that on the shopping list for Dick Blick supplies. All right, this is a dark brown. So what I'm going to do is try this now. There's no guarantee here. I can't promise you anything with this first try. Let me get some of that old Tuscan Red off and just get back to the clear. Okay, so I'm going to take, oh, you know what? I have some old Burnt Umber right here. So you could always reactivate. But I'm going to take some Crimson Red and some of this brown. And let's see. You know what? I can get pretty close to that Tuscan Red. I think what's happening here too is my clear blender is starting to go a little bit. Alright, so basically I just mixed red and a brown. Now I'm not getting as dark as I want right this second. But you get the general idea. I'm going to have to grab another clear blender here. You get the general idea. You can see that we're getting that brown color. So there really is never an excuse if you're working on an assignment or a project and you run out of a pigment. You know, it's actually pretty easy to just mix a color using other colors. Now another way to do this, and again, let me move to another clear blender. Yeah, you're kind of out of luck if your clear blender goes dry. All right, move to another clear blender. There we go. That's what I needed. All right, so we can go in and keep kind of adding some pigment and some color here. Okay, and it's pretty much the same color. And I always kind of blend everything around a little bit just to kind of pull some color there. Now another option for you, let me just clean my blender off real quick, is to use color pencil. So you actually can take color pencil and apply. So again, let's say I'm out of the Tuscan Red, but I have a red pencil. Let me take brown here, and again, no guarantee. I actually haven't tried this combination, but it might be a little too brown. But kind of mix the brown with the red, and you get pretty close to that same Tuscan Red. And then again, colorless blender, and I can get some of the light area filled in, right? So we've got some nice dark pigment from the brown and the pencil, and that actually worked pretty well. It's pretty similar in color. So you can, again, mix colors fairly easily. You just have to make sure you have pigment in your blenders. One thing you can do, so some tips with marker. If a marker starts to run dry, what you can do, stand it upright. This is part of the stand. I have a stand, and this fits into another little stand, and my markers can sit upright. You could use like a glass, you know, just sit the marker in a glass. And if your marker's running dry, what you can do is you could take rubbing alcohol, just regular alcohol from your medicine cabinet, and put a few drops into the tip of the marker, put the cap on, and just let it sit. Prismacolor markers are an alcohol-based marker, so they're non-toxic, really. And the alcohol, it doesn't have fumes. Some other markers have fumes, which make them really hard to deal with. The Prismacolors are that alcohol base, so it's a little easier to deal with. But typically just alcohol from your medicine cabinet will reactivate a marker. So for example, if you did have a marker that went dry, you could, again, on the wide tip, take a few drops, drop it on, put the cap on, just let it sit for a while, and it should reactivate at least some of the pigment and help you get through a project. Let's see, some other things. Since I used a little bit of pencil in here, what I would also then do is I would probably come over here and just add a little bit of pencil work. You don't have to be too precise or anything. It's a matter of getting color around. As the eye sees a color here, it likes to see more of that color or more of that texture that's happening as well. So again, spreading this around a little bit is just kind of a nice idea. All right, let's see. We are actually out of time for this session, but you know, if there's any questions anybody has, if you want to put them in the chat area, we could certainly try to entertain questions for a little bit longer, as long as you guys would like, actually. Kind of like doing these illustrations. And there's a lot more, obviously, we can do with this. But what I would suggest you do is, you know, practice with something you see. Now, I mentioned earlier, too, that in doing this, if you get too dark, you can always go in and lighten it. So I'm going to actually just take a white pencil. I'm going to add a little highlight into just a couple little spots. And I'm using a straight edge just so I can keep it nice and crisp along the edge of the piece of furniture. I'm going to put a little bit right there because this is getting kind of dark on me. And if you don't like how dark that got, you can take your clear blender and scrub a little bit of that lightness right back out and add a little more color. So there's just some basic tips for how to add shadow, how to add some lighting effects, how to plan out your lighting effects. You know, always just take a scrap sheet, plan out what you want to do, and then, you know, go into this with an idea of exactly what you want to accomplish. And again, don't worry if you go over the lines, because as you're illustrating the wall behind it, again, whatever colors and pencils you might use, you could always scrub those right out. So, all right, if any questions, comments, anything, again, if you could use the chat feature, that would be fine. If not, I'd like to just thank everybody for being here tonight. I appreciate your time and letting me share these techniques with you. Hopefully you'll be able to use some of these techniques in adding value and mixing and, you know, creating your own colors. I mean, if you have a custom color, again, that method we used for this side and this piece, you could use that to create just about any color or pattern. So again, thank you all for being here tonight, and I hope you have a good night.